Welcome to Surviving the Black Church, a podcast that sheds light and brings awareness to religious trauma and dismantles oppressive systems within the Black church.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Surviving the Black Church podcast. I'm Jonathan, and I'm here with my co-host Nikki G. And
Hey.
together, we're creating these conversations and safe spaces for us to talk about this powerful material. It is very challenging. A lot of things that we are talking about, a lot of us don't want to talk about because they have been considered taboo.
Mhm.
And very complicated and complex, and particularly with the relationship that we have with religion, the Black church, spirituality, faith, and mental health. So we are diving deep into these conversations, and we have a guest coming on, and we are so excited about this guest. Her name is Dr. Jessica Isom. She is a community psychiatrist, and she brings a wealth of experience working with Black folks who look like us, and she also has experience with Black folks who are trying to make the balancing act of their spirituality and their faith and their mental health and well-being. And so together, we are going to be talking about how do we reclaim our voice? How do we have a voice where it reflects our lived experiences? How do we find support for us to share our voice and deliver our voice and express ourselves with all the burdens that we have incurred over time? And then also how to find some healing, how to find some support in the struggle, as we're all kind of struggling with something, um, in ways that honor all parts of ourselves and our lived experience. So, Dr. Isom, we welcome you to the show.
Hey. Thank you both. I'm glad to be here and glad to chat with you all, and contribute in whatever way that I can.
Awesome, awesome. So let's get right into the topic, and let's start with the first question that we have, which is around leadership in our community. And historically, there's been like leaders in our community, the Black community, and we have relied upon these leaders for wisdom and knowledge and insight. However, when it comes to the Black community and the Black church, we see that leaders can go from being very supportive to being overbearing and controlling. And so I wanted to give an example of that, and we kind of all of us can really talk about this in a way that just as a conversation about leadership in the Black community and Black churches, where we have pastors who don't necessarily have the formal mental health training, but they are attempting to kind of counsel people who have severe trauma, suicidal ideation, just going through some very intense struggles, and could be, whether it be unintentional or intentional, causing harm because of that lack of professional expertise. So we have leaders or pastors that are providing guidance for people, but there is an overstep of their boundaries when it comes to just providing like support that could be, intentionally harming people. So that's an example of a leader. Then we have like in church, church mothers or female leaders who are often the ones that are over relied upon for support or caregiving. And whether it be the emotional labor or, running different ministries or doing things other leaders in the church. And we could talk about different leaders, but there is this sense of burnout, there's a sense of exhaustion that they feel. So, giving some examples of just types of leaders and what they might have experienced, and kind of like, let's talk about like how people can tell, how Black folks can tell when leadership is crossing the line and what can be done about that. Let's start there in the conversation.
Mhm. Yeah. I would say, um, one, I did grow up in the church. My father was a pastor. His father was a pastor. They actually own a small church in rural Florida, and the lines are very clear when you're in that environment around who has authority, voice, and all those sorts of things. And you learn that when you're a kid. So it's very clear. And as you grow up, you can imagine when you're younger that there's a lot of power for any person in a position of authority, whether it's a teacher, pastor, or something else. And as we get older, we kind of understand, yeah, there's like some really good stuff there, but maybe they're not the end all be all for everything. And we learn that there is a limit somewhere. But sometimes in certain spaces, for example, like the church, it's hard to know where that line is. And I would say a way of telling the line can partially be connected to how they show up in moments where there should be some like uncertainty there. And one of those spaces where uncertainty can show up is when a person has a problem that has to do with whatever part of their health in whatever way they describe it. And someone can say, this is what I can offer to you, and this is what I can't. And that's kind of a clue that there's a line that they understand in their own mind. Or they can show up and say, I have all the answers. You just sit down and you just listen and you just receive from me, and I'll give unto you or bestow upon you the things that you need. Follow these steps and you'll be all better. And if you don't follow the steps and or if you don't improve, it's about you and something that you are doing or not doing, not about me. And when that kind of presence shows up, that's a clue that the person themselves may not have a good sense of their own boundaries and then may cross boundaries with you and trying to offer you counsel or support.
Yeah, interesting. Nikki, did you have any thoughts on this question around crossing the line or what Dr. Isom was saying about lines being drawn?
Well, I mean, to continue and further her point, I think this happens so often in the Black church specifically. I think many parishioners come in with the desire and the notion to be connected to God, but also to be guided and, taught and come under submission of leadership. And so sometimes parishioners come in without boundaries. And sometimes leaders understand that and they exploit the lack of boundaries that are there. And so I think we had a conversation with a guest earlier where they talked about how some pastors do their taxes for their members. And I'm like, what? That is a crazy boundary. Like there's no boundary really. But a lot of it on both ends, I think the parishioners come in with a lot of unmet needs. And then some of the leaders feel like they've been endowed with power and wisdom from God to meet those needs. And it may start off okay, so they think, but after a while, burnout commences, controlling issues start to pop up, uh, a whole lot of unhealthy, toxic type of behavior starts to arise. And so I think this is great that we're starting off this way, talking about, just the differences on both ends. I know being a cult survivor, I didn't realize until I started to do my healing that, whoa, I came to the table looking for a whole lot out of my leaders. I'm not excusing their behavior, but I didn't realize that, I wanted a spiritual mother and a spiritual father so bad that I was willing to undergo whatever process was necessary to have that attachment. So I'll pause right there just to say this is an issue that needs, to be worked through. Indeed. Yeah.
And Nikki, I'll say to that point, because it is so hard for us when we're younger, it's harder for us throughout our entire lives to know what to do with people who are supposed to take care of us, starting from those that are closest to us when we're kids, whoever those might be, whether it be biological parents or otherwise, all the way throughout the rest of our lives. Everything is about figuring out what do I give space for and what do I protect myself from. And it is so hard to figure it out, especially when a group around you is saying, trust unconditionally. You'll be fine. You'll be safe here. It's very, very hard.
And if
Yeah.
you have a generational example to do the same thing, if mom and dad submitted to the leaders this way, had no boundaries, then I'm going to follow suit eventually, unless I start to say, hey, wait a minute, something's not right here. So, yeah, there's a lot of reasons as to why we kind of, enter into that type of behavior pattern with people that are in clergy.
Hmm. Yeah. And I wanted to start out with just talking about this because I know in a previous episode we talked with the pastor and just how he was talking about just being brought with so many issues and it's almost like being the representative of the whole and there's not a lot of support being offered. And I think just creating this frame around like, in our community is there's so many issues that we are burdened with individually and how pastors and these people in these church systems are often kind of burdened with the responsibility of having to take care of all of these needs from our community. And so that's what can kind of lead to these porous boundaries and limits on, where do I begin and end, so because of all of the demands that are being placed upon me. And that can lead to unintended mental health consequences as a result. So I appreciate, those questions, and go ahead.
Can I add to that? I think the other aspect is historically, the Black church, we grew up knowing or believing that everything we need was in the church, right? This is where our
Mhm.
orators came out of, and our politicians, and our poets, and our activists came out of, singers, musicians came out of the Black church. And so there is this notion that's been generationally passed down. It's not even said, it's assumed, everything you need are in the four walls of the church. You need physical healing, go to the altar, let the elders anoint you with oil. You need mental healing, the same thing. And then a lot of times scriptures are used to justify that. And, if someone believes that and that's their faith, that's fine. But I think now we're in a season, and I'm grateful for this season we're in, where that is being challenged a bit, especially by the younger generation. They're like, hold on, I love Jesus, but I'm going to see a therapist at the same time. And so now those four walls are being expanded, and there is more information coming forward to say that's been our history, but that doesn't mean we don't need to expand and look outside of the church for additional support and healing. So I just wanted to throw that in about the historical part of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And Nikki, to that point too, historically there weren't a lot of protections in place for places outside of the church, and to be transparent, like the history of psychiatry and just the helping professions as far as mental health is valid to have a part of the conversation as well. So it might have been that the church represented relative safety compared to accessing other forms of help out there. And at the same time, one TikTok video or one Google review or one email these days could lead a person who violates you in some way to lose their job, their livelihood, their reputation, their credentials. There's a lot more control that we have over how we're treated, and that makes the things outside of those four walls relatively more safe now than they were in the past, and we can have different relationships with them for that reason.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. Relative safety. And there was a pastor that recorded with us, and he talked about churches being not necessarily being safe spaces, but being safer
Mhm.
spaces for people. And there's a differentiation between the two. But I wanted to kind of shift now into talking about church hurt and religious trauma, because I know that oftentimes church hurt is assigned to survivors or people who are on, these platforms, social media platforms, talking about their experiences. And I wanted to kind of give like a mock example of it. Let's say Lisa, she's a lifelong member of a church. She's struggling with depression. She's seeking out support from her church, particularly her pastor. Instead of receiving compassion or empathy, she's told that her mental health issues stem from a lack of belief, a lack of faith, and she needs to pray harder. Church community begins to talk about gossip, about her struggles, labeling that she's not, praying hard enough. She's weak in her faith. She's not really a Christian, all these things. And so she feels judged, unsupported. She leaves the church. She distances herself. She's met with hurt, emotional scars, distrust of spiritual leaders, shame about her mental health, and she has a spiritual crisis. So let's talk about the differences between these a little bit. Church hurt, religious trauma, these words that are often said, and why is it important for us to know about the distinctions of these words or what these words mean? But these are the words that we often hear about when they've been church hurt, or they have been this, or they have been that. So I'm just curious to know if anyone has any thoughts on that and what they may have heard on social media or just in real life.
Yeah, I'll say because hurt is real, and it's hard sometimes to compare because the way that it could land for a person is that it sort of like diminishes or minimizes what hurt is for them. So one way for my brain of kind of trying to distinguish the two is to say, at least in my world as a psychiatrist, as a mental health professional, there's a way that we understand the word trauma that distinguishes it from other kinds of like emotional injuries that a person might experience. And you might say, for example, church hurt is like a cut or burn, that's superficial. It's there for a while on on your skin. There's a healing process that has to, or hopefully comes along with it. And then folks can sometimes re-engage, maybe in the same context, maybe in a different context, with their faith relationships and community. Whereas trauma is, it's more of a deeper injury, and maybe even repetitive, like happens over and over and over again, or such a violation that there's very little recovery from. There's more so dealing with for a very long period of time how that has impacted you, and that impact affects your ability to be a person, affects your ability to show up for yourself, ability to show up for others, maybe do your job. It affects your ability to function. And when we talk about trauma, it's often that's the way we're thinking about it, as something that's happened to you once or multiple times that affects your ability to be a person. And the wound is just so deep, it requires so much more caretaking, so much more attention and support. And the wound often doesn't quite ever go away, which is different than, that more superficial or surface injury or cut or hurt that was experienced, that some of us might just have that just in the back of our mind and never think about it like ever again, or maybe think about it and it kind of gets packed away, versus the trauma, it shows up and it could just change everything in that moment, that day, or for weeks when it kind of resurfaces for us and affects what we're doing and how we're showing up. So that's kind of how I think about it. And I'm also curious from you both, like how you've heard people talk about it and what your thoughts are on it.
Yeah, I think this is an important topic in our community because the language, it does make a difference. I love how you just described that. And I love the analogy you use. I used to use something from, the medical field, a hospital or, ER, getting, a cut, like you said, an abrasion, and they get sent home, treat them and street them, so to speak, versus you have to be wheeled into the OR. So I totally agree, with that assessment. But in our community, unfortunately, well, let me start and say this. I think it's great that a lot of the Black churches are starting to at least talk about there's some injury, there's some wounding, there's some trauma. So that might not even have been talked about, let's say 10, 20 years ago. So I think that's great the conversation is being had. However, I think a lot of times the term church hurt and the actual trauma and the wound and the traumatic effects after that are being all lumped under the umbrella church hurt. There's so many books that have been written, podcast episodes on TikTok. You'll find the language church hurt more than you find religious trauma in the Black community because that's really, what people know and that's what they describe it as. And again, there's nothing wrong with saying that, hurt is hurt. So we don't want to dismiss that. But at the same token, I think more education needs to come forward about the different terms because they're dramatically different. If I use this analogy a lot, if I was told I'm going to sing on Sunday for the church choir and I get to rehearsal tonight and the worship leader has already given that position to somebody else and they're already practicing with the choir when I walk in and I'm like, what in the world? And they never say anything to me. And they're practicing and rehearsal's over and they still never say anything to me. And then Sunday comes and the person sings. I'm probably going to be a little hurt, a little slighted, a little confused, But like you said, it depends on how it lands for the person. For some people, that may be so significant that it may morph into the traumatic effects. They can't sleep, they're ruminating about it a lot and things of that nature. But for the most part, that's something that, okay, I didn't like it. I went and talked to the church leader. He told me, you know what, Nikki, I'm so sorry. I actually forgot that I told this person first when I told you. And I'm like, okay, and then we were able to clean it up and I'm able to go on. But when you're dealing with religious trauma, your interpersonal relationships are kind of failing a little bit, you can't get your footing in life is affecting you on the workplace, is affecting you, personally, your ability to sleep, all these different things. And I don't know if that distinction is being brought up that much when it comes to this topic in the Black church. So like I said, I'm grateful that at least it's being labeled as something. I just think that there needs to be more education to be able to distinguish the two because when I was in a lot of the church experiences that I had, the adverse religious experiences, had I known that I was actually dealing with abuse and was dealing with the traumatic effects, I might not have stayed as long as I did. But because I thought it was just a little bit of church hurt, I thought the enemy was trying to take me out of my place in God. I thought it was an attack of the enemy and I had to endure like a good soldier. So I was rationalizing the experience with the scriptures myself, let alone the church mothers that were praying for me, let alone the prophets that would prophesy over me, let alone the dreams that the pastor said he had about the enemy trying to take me out my spot, right? And so all of that caused me to just rationalize, like, you know what? This is just hurt. I can just forgive and give it to God and I will be fine. But I was actually being spiritually abused in that place of worship. So I think this is always important to be able to distinguish between the two, because somebody may be hearing this and they continue to go back to the same place over and over again, and it's not church, it's church hurt. It's more than that.
Right. And I think that part about how much we internalize that there's something wrong with us or that we're not doing enough is really important, because humans are resilient. And it's important to start there, because if we're struggling, it usually means there's something going on, right? Because we are so resilient that, I mean, maybe there's blips along the road, but we can usually course correct and get back on track. If there's a persistent struggle, that's like your body, your mind, and really the world, the spiritual realm, whatever, screaming at you and saying there's something wrong here. And it's important to create space for maybe a part of that having to do with you, but usually it's like environmental or contextual. There's things going on around you that are creating such a struggle for you that you're unable to overcome it. And then that can lead to an investigation of like, well, what might this be that goes beyond just your own like personal shortcomings or failings to, well, what might you be for me, like you people around me or this institution around me or things of that nature. So I'm just really just chewing on this idea of like not thinking about not naturally coming to the conclusion that there's more than just something wrong with us. And that's really sad that so many of us are taught to start there. I know I can relate to that there's something I'm not doing in this situation and that's why things are so hard, versus no, there's something I'm not receiving or something that's being done to me that is creating the struggle for me at this time, and I need to figure that out. So yeah.
Yeah, and just to add to what everyone is saying to this conversation, it's almost like with church hurt, there's almost like this sense of blame shifting to the person that experienced the hurt, but also the sense of invalidation or even like emotional and spiritual bypassing that the hurt even took place, to say it's almost like this avoidance to actually take accountability and responsibility for the action that was inflicted by the perpetrator of the hurt or the harm or the abuser, to put it on the victim and versus the perpetrator. And it's almost like, to what Nikki was saying, as far as church hurt being lumped in with other forms of abuse and harm, like even as extreme as sexual abuse and abuse that is more kind of, more pervasive cases of abuse. And I think that is problematic, to put something just as mild as someone speaking negatively to you, putting that in the same category as like being sexually violated. Like that's why it just seems to be problematic to say that all types of harm that has been inflicted is church hurt, because it can be on a spectrum. And I know that even just, gaslighting behaviors stemming from that, and also not even just, kind of even considering historical trauma when we're talking about African Americans and Black people in terms of the complex relationship that we have with religion, even just being rooted out of slavery. That type of experience is never discussed in conversations about religious trauma. And I think even that material is even missing from the dialogue around just the generational weight that Black people carry because of the way in which we were introduced to religion. We were forced or coerced to believe in this religion that came from our oppressor. So, but all of this is being labeled as church hurt and nothing else. So that's what makes this more just, complex, and why the distinctions and the differentiation is so important here. So I don't know if anyone
Yeah.
has any thoughts on that, but yeah, just
Yeah, I think those are great points to add to it too, Jonathan. And it's often used a lot, and there's one aspect, like Dr. Jessica was saying, like where we start to internalize it and we think, well, did I cause this? Is this my fault? But then added to it, the historical trauma, but then added to it, the leadership not wanting to take responsibility and accountability. And so they use scripture as justification. And this is where it gets so toxic. This is where it's it's harder when you think about, comparison to other traumas, because now you are merging someone's spirituality, their faith, their belief system with what just occurred to them, especially if you're talking about sexual abuse and things of that nature. To use scriptures that God justifies this behavior is crazy, right? It's mind blowing that people do that, but they do. I mean, I've been in church services where I've seen people, who haven't been in church in months, and then the pastor's preaching and will call that person out and tell them to come to the front, and all the church mothers and the intercessors are surrounding the person, and then they're spitting and oil is being put on a person. So they're praying this person back into the fold in a more consistent way. Like, you don't know what happened to this individual. Y'all just gonna do this type of act against the person's will, possibly. There is, and this is a learned behavior. This is passed down generationally. This is a lot of times what our people feel like is necessary to do, and I'm gonna behave myself. I'm just saying that whole spiritual bypassing, it really kind of irks me, and this is why I'm grateful for this conversation, for resources that talk about it, because being a 5-time cult survivor, I didn't really get it to the last cult I was in. And what I did differently was I didn't look for the scriptures to justify what I had just been through. I didn't try to spiritualize my experience. I said, let me do something that I have been told not to do. I started reading books by psychologists. I started reading books by people who, wrote about cult recovery, and it was not spiritual at all. And once I started to understand certain psychological terms and seeing cycles, I'm like, oh my goodness, so this is why this happened. That didn't mean I had to throw away my faith at that moment, but I needed something more than just what I was getting in a spiritual sense, because it was continually harming me, right? And once I understood and broadened my horizon, expanded where I could get support, that is when the healing started to begin. Yeah, I'm gonna be quiet. Go ahead, Dr. Jessica.
Don't be quiet. I mean the word that came to mind is like humiliation. And I can't think, I mean, of any situation for any person, truly, even at the extremes, although at the extremes we allow humiliation to be a part of what we like want for people who do terrible things. But humiliation is never a good thing at all. It doesn't, and I mean, we know so much about human behaviors and how humans change and make decisions. Humiliation doesn't doesn't get us to that goal of like re-engaging a person. It just produces shame, embarrassment, guilt, like a whole host of other problems. And I think for the people that do the humiliation, even if they don't like consciously recognize it doesn't feel good, somewhere in there, there's like something communicating like, ugh, this kind of feels uncomfortable for me because we're human, for the most part. Just the visual of a person being put into the position of having to defend themselves against whoever knows what was going on in their lives. That is really, really tragic and sad. And I also know really common too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. There's
Yeah.
so much there's so much that is happening in this dynamic, and humiliation being one of them, and shame and religious shame at that, to the point where you're being reduced to an object and you're moved away from your humanity. In this, because we've had some episodes where we've been kind of talking about the LGBTQIA community and the way that religion has been used to humiliate people who have a different sexual orientation than themselves. And so, but also, to add to this discussion, even just around Christian nationalism, we've been doing episodes on that in terms of how that has impacted the Black church and how that's another layer of religious trauma that is not in the conversations that we're having when it comes to how that has impacted Black people in terms of how the political environment is influencing the way in which Black people operate in these Black churches. So there's a lot of things that we do need to talk about. We do need to keep, processing on, because it's not just as black and white, this or that. Well, this is church hurt, this is religious trauma, this is, you know what I mean? So I'm glad that this is like the beginning of this dialogue around this. And hopefully as we move forward, we can kind of expand on it. So, but yeah, I just wanted to kind of move to the next question around stigma in terms of, mental health issues carrying a lot of stigma in the Black church. And we talk about mental health stigma. And so an example of that might be a congregant or a parishioner struggling with bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. And, the stigma is feeling judged or isolated because the symptoms are often described as demonic possession or spiritual warfare or a spiritual battle. And then that kind of leads someone to be pushed into withdrawal, isolation, because now they can't talk about their mental health status. They're not getting the right support. And so that would be an example of stigma. So let's talk about how this is a challenge, this challenge in terms of how it's challenging to reach out for help or get support. And what do you all think could be done about this?
Yeah, it's an annoying conversation because, and I'll say this because there's a historical like foundation for it that has to do with our own oppression of like it's with everything, right? But in the sense of multiple things. One, like Black people having the capacity to even be ill is questionable historically, meaning we were considered so simplistic that we couldn't have things like anxiety or depression or some other things. Those were things that were for Europeans who were much more intelligent. Those are the problems of the intelligent people. So that was one force that was like pushing us away from even having access to the full human experience of struggle. And then on the other hand, too, to struggle is to be vulnerable in a society that's already like hyper focused on you and your behavior and what you do and what you don't do. So preserving this image of being functional and being quote unquote normal is protective. You don't want people in your business thinking that you're potentially a threat, for example, to them or not able to show up in the ways that they want you to. And then there's just the experience of being in a position of vulnerability that can be really tough in the Black community because you may not know how you're going to be responded to. And a lot of the responses that are less supportive or more negative come from ignorance about what it means to struggle, which is also interesting too. And I'll compare. If I think my struggles are always connected to things I have control over, that is comforting to me. That is like a psychological defense against powerlessness. So if all of my struggles are because I'm not doing something or because I need to do something, then I will always be able to overcome my struggle, period. In contrast, if my struggles are partially because of things I'm doing or not doing, but also these things out there, that's not a very like fun position to be in because while I can do some things to help myself, I can't do everything. And that can feel like a weaker or more vulnerable position. And that requires me to do things like be vulnerable, transparent, and maybe even ask for help. And there's not a guarantee that help will come to me. So there's all this uncertainty there. So I get why people, including myself, want to think and feel that it's all within me. I have all the control over the situation and I can get myself out of the struggle. But it's just not true. It's not true. It's never been true since we were born as infants, since we develop into children, adolescents, young adults. We are interdependent people. Like we always need each other and always have to rely on each other and vice versa. And there's just lots of forces like I just described, like the historical stuff, the stuff that has to do with just being humans and how we like navigate vulnerability that makes it hard to exist. And then that ignorance is just such a big piece of it because it can influence how we offer people compassion or like empathy or don't and so offer them judgment. So it's tough. It's tough out here for, you could say, quote unquote, everybody, but it is uniquely, distinctly tough culturally for Black people, dealing with all these things while also just trying to take care of themselves and figure out where support should come from.
Yeah. Nikki,
Yeah,
any
and
thoughts?
I just think about even, this particular topic with Black religious trauma and, hearing from some clients, from some survivors, and they're saying like, I've gone to the support groups that did not look like me because I needed the help at that time. But over time, I realized my experiences were never looked at, never talked about. I felt a little, ashamed to even share it because they didn't have, they were ignorant about the church mother and how you had to dress, and the church mother will check you in the bathroom or in the church parking lot if your skirt was yay high. They didn't understand the deliverance experiences that those who have a different sexual orientation would sometimes have to undergo, depending on if it was a Kojic church, holiness church. Those type of experiences, a lot of those who are not Black are really are ignorant and don't really understand. So it's harder. But at the same token, in the mental health space, we are not the majority. And so, I find a lot of people say, you know what? I'm aware I got religious trauma, don't know what to do about it. I don't trust going to someone that doesn't look like me, but where are the people that look like me? And, unfortunately, there's not a lot of those who are Black that are in the space of, practitioners that are tackling this topic. So every guest that have come on here, we are so honored. Even if this is not your main thing, at least you can bring more clarity to this topic and awareness to this topic, because I think our people really, really need it. I mean, we said this on the other day, but I'm paraphrasing, but long are the days where we no longer talk about religion and politics anymore. It is deeply rooted in its impact on us as a people, and they're merged together, and it's going to take some, unbinding, if you will, to really get to the root of a lot of what our issues are. But at the same token, getting to the point, like you said, we're independent. We need that support. We need that help. And so this is why Jonathan and I are do the support groups. This is why we're continuing to figure out how can we offer more resources, because I think once people start understanding, oh, it's not church hurt, it's actually religious trauma, then it's like, oh, I want to do something about it. What's the next step? Are there any clinicians in my area? Are there any support groups I can join? So I think getting the word out there is definitely helpful. But to say that there's no stigma in our community when it comes to either this topic or anything, that is untrue. There's still a lot of lack of trust and things of that nature when it comes to getting the mental health support. So yeah.
Yeah. And I would say that just I was thinking about ice cream, maybe just because I want ice cream. Uh, like it's hard, that your point, Nikki, about um the work, like the who's available to serve people in like the traditional mental health spaces is not a lot of Black people. For example, for
Mhm.
psychiatrists, we're like 2%, right? And Black people are distinct, like underlying period. That is true. We are in our histories and our experiences, including our culture. And at the same time, we're also human. And when I
Mhm.
mention ice cream, it's sort of like the base of the ice cream is the same and like the toppings might be different. And the base of the human experience includes these kinds of things like violations, betrayals, hurts, traumas, and those sorts of things. And the base can be responded to by any like mental health professional, regardless of their like racial or ethnic background or their understanding. But to understand the toppings, it does require effort, humility to like, be comfortable with not knowing things and all those sorts of things. Those are necessary. And I struggle with how to say like, that there could be some trust in the fact that the base can be responded to of the human experience, like the base of like the ice cream, that vanilla flavor or maybe chocolate, like we can do something about that because we know you are human, right? So we can give you language. We could help you with some strategies or skills, connect you to resources. But I always have to acknowledge that the top ends, you know, may not be something that the person that you meet can respond to. And for every person, it's this decision between like, well, can I get something? And am I okay with that something? Or can I get everything? And do I absolutely need everything when I'm trying to connect with a person like me or you all here? And I just want to just acknowledge that is hard, even for me as a person who sees a mental health professional and has for a long time. A lot of the times she's responding to the base, just the base of the ice cream, not the toppings. Maybe she'll flirt
Mhm.
with it, but I'm like, you didn't really quite get it. And I have had to accept that some of my toppings were just not going to be able to connect on, while also appreciating that she responded to the base. But there might be some other things that I just got to seek somebody else out for. So I just want to name for people, it's very normal to be like negotiating what that looks like. And it
Um,
sucks too. It sucks to have to negotiate, what you're going to get out of the experience because it's not supposed to be that way.
I'm
yeah.
so glad. I'm sorry, Jonathan. Go
No,
ahead.
no, no, go ahead.
No, I'm so glad you talked about that. Oh, I think it's gonna help a lot of listeners. I've struggled with that too, especially coming out of my last cult. I was like, all right, this is it. I'm gonna go. And I wasn't against therapy. It was not encouraged. So I just didn't go. But once I came out, I was like, I'm gonna go. And she didn't understand anything about narcissism at the time. She definitely didn't understand anything about cults or religious trauma or anything. So I was wound up doing a lot of the educating, but at that point I needed it because my PTSD was like very acute and I wasn't sleeping. It was a lot. So I said to myself, well, you know what? Like you said, the human being, she can help me with some things, but understanding that I may not get everything that I want. And even now, when I look for a mental health professional, I kind of have that in my mind that I may not get everything, but what are my immediate needs at this moment? And can this practitioner meet those needs versus now there's sometimes I would like some
I know.
cultural experiences and stuff like that, but I'm like, until, our people flood the field a little bit more or different modalities change, I'm going to take what I need to get out of the situation because I need the help. I need the support. And so if you're listening and you're like, I've been wanting to go to a therapist, but I don't know how to look. I don't know. I mean, I have this. It's okay. One step at a time, kind of prioritize what those needs are and still look for support and help. It doesn't hurt. Actually, it helps. So I have a therapist now and I'm really enjoying the experience, but they don't look like me, but it's helping me as a human being. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And one other point I wanted to make here is that, when I was listening to you, Dr. Isom, I took what you said about the humanity of Black people, and I was like, in my mind, I was thinking about a timeline of when our humanity started or when it began, because it seems like there has been so much systemic fragmentation of the Black experience that our timeline may have not started, you know, as what we think that it started, because so much of the harm, and this is why it's not church hurt, because it is religious trauma, is because so much of our experiences have been anchored in trauma. It is trauma. And so, even this conversation, and this is why we have to, when we're talking about trauma about Black people, we have to consider the nuances and the context historically about what truly happened to our ancestors and to the people that came before us, because so much of their humanity was cut off. It was disconnected by the system that perpetuated this harm against individuals and communities. And so I think people understanding that history and the context and all of these things will be able to help us to relate better to this material, and providing reasons as to why there is distrust of the system, right? There's an understandable reaction to what happened in the history, in our history. And I think even a solution may be to even validate the distrust, not bypass it, not operate. And this is providers, clinicians. It has to be included when we're seeing clients, or when we're seeing people come into our office that say, I don't trust you, I don't trust the system. I mean, what you're saying is absolutely valid, because if you look at the system, it is not meant to be trusted. And so starting from there, bottom up versus top down, may help people feel safe enough to interact. I mean, I know when I started, I had that issue come up in my practice with people just not trusting me, with them in their stories. And when you start hearing their stories, it's like they've been betrayed, they have been neglected, they have been abused, they have been traumatized. And so they have no reason to trust me in the services that I'm offering, because those are the systems that betrayed them and treated them like trash.
Yeah.
So we have to really be honest about these conversations. And I'm also a 1%er, 1 to 2%er in the field. And that's a function of the systemic failure. The whole system is corrupted. Oh, and I think we just need to come on the same page with that. So may that be the baseline. May that be future conversations we can have with people who are either serving as a helping professional or seeking out a therapist. But that's all in part of being trauma informed and culturally informed as well. So we're encouraging that. So yeah. So I'm going to move to another question around the spiritualization of mental health issues, which is something also in the Black church tends to happen. While spiritual experiences are valid, but this idea of praying it away, being accused of a lack of faith, it seems that there is no acknowledgement of anything that is related to the mental health status of a person. And so I think the question that we want to ask here is, how do we tell, or if because I know we talked about this before, how can we tell if something that we experience is spiritual or could it be something that is mental or emotional that we need help with, like a mental health issue? Like, is there a difference, or what do you think about that, Dr. Isom?
Yeah, I'll speak from the perspective of like patients or people I serve who create space for both. So, and the reason that they end up creating space for both is often because they've reached their limit and what they feel like they're able to do on their own, plus in their relationship with the church. Like they've tried all the things and things are just falling apart. And I think that's the underline there. Things are falling apart. And they would say that it's not the binary of one or the other. There is a spiritual battle going on. That is what is happening for them at this time, some of them. And that's how we work together, is around me supporting them through that spiritual battle. Others will say, like, I'm trying to like shore up my faith practices to address like the spiritual parts of this. And also I recognize there's some other stuff going on too. Like they might say it's a spiritual battle going on, and I also know I have like this thing called anxiety or depression or whatever. But either way, there's something going on where things are falling apart, and all of these people are trying to figure out what to do, just as much as they're trying to name what it is. And my role in relationship with them is honoring however they describe it, but also creating space for, well, these are your options for helping you with this battle or this concern that you have. And those options can include like faith-based practices like prayer, or other rituals. It can include hopefully maintaining a healthy relationship with your like faith-based community, and also can include other things like like offering to or referring you to a resource like therapy, or even like talking about medications with you. And I have people who are on some powerful medications for their spiritual battle. And when I say powerful, I prescribe a lot of different things, and some of them are mild, and some of them are a lot more, pack a more powerful punch. And they are taking it for hearing voices, for example, which is a part of their spiritual battle. They're taking an antipsychotic for feeling like people are after them or out to get them as a part of their spiritual battle, and it helps them, period. And that's it. And my job is to say, okay, well, like, how is it going? How is this specific thing useful to you? Not always to say, well, let's like tease apart which part of this is spiritual versus not, because for them, things are falling apart. So I would just say for folks out there who are trying to figure out what it means to like relinquish some control in the form of accessing other services outside of the church, all it means is that you're accessing other resources, like to add to your toolbox to help you when things are falling apart. And I think any person who receives judgment for trying to help themselves, like that should be like a warning sign or signal that there's something not quite right about the person who's offering that judgment to you. Because people that care about you should always want you to do whatever you can possibly do to help yourself when things are falling apart. And that's where it becomes tricky. I've had people secretly see me. I've had people come to the office and say that the church told them not to come. And a lot of our early relationship is me saying, like, I'm glad that you're here. These are the things I can do to help. But also, let's have a conversation about why it's wrong for you to be here. Like, what's that about? The last thing I'll say is that sometimes this conversation happens completely disconnected from the church. I had one guy come in who's in his late 30s now, whose mom, completely unrelated to the church, said, don't go see her. Because she was distrustful of me. And I still remember later seeing his mom when I was going to get some catfish down the street. And she was like, oh, hey, are you Dr. Isom? And I was like, yeah. And she was like, thank you. Because her son has actually improved. He's improved a lot based on like therapy and also some medication as well. So she kind of came around. So I make that point to say that it's not just church people that are distrustful or worried about making connections. Black people are, because of all the things that you just described, Jonathan. But I just want to say, when things are falling apart, it is normal, natural, expected. God would support you trying to access all the different types of resources out there, including what comes from traditional mental health professionals and institutions.
Yeah. Nikki, I see you over there. You have any?
Trying to figure out what is appropriate to say or not to her response, but just about
Yes.
the question, because
Yeah.
okay, let me start off with say this. I love that people have chosen to come to see you, whether they're just in the Black community or in the Black church or church, having a faith connection with faith or not. I think that is a beautiful thing. And the fact that it's happening, it encourages me, right? I'm just thinking about the many who don't,
Mhm.
who have been taught that, psychiatry is the boogeyman, that medication is the devil, all these. you know them, you've heard them probably even before you got into the field, and even more so, as you're practicing. And I don't know, because I've been in cults where a lot of the leaders probably need to be sitting in your office. The things that people and I guess I have more questions than I have comments, because I'm trying to really make sure I'm nice with this, but it's, that line, where is that line? Because a lot of people's lives are unfortunately ruined or demolished because they believed a leader who said, Moses came and sat on the couch with him and told him to do this, that, and the third. And then obviously there's a lot that could be there with as far as their diagnosis, but the people believe it. And, there's not much vetting. They actually encourage that type of stuff. They love that. They think that this is godly. And I'm not here to debate about that. I'm just saying how it's received by the people. People have moved to different countries because someone said that they had an experience. And they don't see that as a sign of there may be some bigger issues here at play, and they might need some mental health professional to connect with. And it's just, I don't know, as far as the church, how do we get to that place where this type of conversation can happen before it is assumed God came down and really visited them and the message is right and it's godly? Is there a subsequent thought process that maybe the person may have some issues? That couples with a lot of the toxic behaviors that are connected with that so-called revelation. So I'm not just saying someone thinking that God spoke to them or encouraged them. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about they are controlling people with the
Right.
spiritual experiences that they're having. I'm pretty sure you've heard stories like that in your office. I guess, what's your thought about any of that?
And I watch a lot of cult documentaries as a psychiatrist.
Uh-huh.
So I'll just say that because it's fascinating what people are allowed to get away with.
Huh.
I don't know if this is helpful, but this is just the imagery that came to my mind of like the discernment, because I experience this as well in my positioning as an authority figure, as a psychiatrist. That, let's say, for example, I was in my office and I said to a person sitting on my couch that elephants could fly. And then, scene two, I'm just standing on a corner or sitting on a curb, completely de-identify, and I said elephants can fly. Like, it would be received two different ways. In my office, there might be like a tiny bit of skepticism, but that's Dr. Isom. So, maybe she's right. Like, elephants actually can fly. Whereas if I was on the corner or sitting on the curb, it might be like 50-50 that like that's not true, or they might completely dismiss me. And I think that context, like where the person who's speaking sits, matters, because it shapes how much we offer them healthy skepticism or don't. So yeah. And then the flip side would be if the pastor who says that, or person says that Jesus came to sit, or not Jesus, that Moses came to sit beside them and had this conversation with them, and they were on my couch, like in my office, I wouldn't disbelieve them. Like, I wouldn't say they're completely like out of their minds, but I would have questions. Tell me more. like
Yeah.
like tell me more about what this means for you,
Yeah.
and then also tell me more about what this means for others. And that second question is very important, because what it means for you is what it means for you. It's not my business outside of curiosity. Lots of things can have personal meaning for us, but when it extends to what it means for other people, that's when my spidey senses get activated.
Mhm.
Because then it becomes a thing of like, well, what makes your experience something that should dictate other people's lives? And often that only becomes the case when you're in a certain position, and that's in a role of authority. That could even be something that's true, where you could have this experience and say, now for the next 10 days, nobody can drink red soda, period. And that's because this message was received by this important person, and now y'all can't drink red soda. And that's happened in history so many times, that a person has an experience, gives this instruction, and sometimes it's mild, but sometimes people die, right? They lose their lives, or they're exposed to horrible abuses. And I think that question of what does it mean for you versus what does it mean for me, and that what does it mean for me has to, in our minds, activate some kind of like skepticism that protects ourselves, is just really, really important, because that's instinctive. Like, that's just nature. Usually
Mhm.
stirring something in our chest or in our
Mhm.
stomach or our bodies that's saying, oh, okay, this is shifted. Now you're trying to tell me what I need to be doing or not need to be doing. Now I really got to just prepare myself to be fully present and like engage with this information, and avoid being passive and just receiving
Mhm.
it and not doing with it. So that would be how I would describe the process, like an activation process of just paying more attention and then
Mhm.
really try to have some healthy skepticism that just creates like a bit of a pause to figure out what you're going to do with like whatever they're sharing with you. I think
That is
that
so
important.
good. That is
Right.
so good. Like, it's the power. Again, it always comes back to control and power when it comes to these topics, but is what place that you're sitting in that you are having, these experiences, and what are you doing with it? How is it impacting others? Because that is the kicker. That's, every cult leader. I think of Jim Jones when you talked about the red soda, the fact that majority of the people that were part of the People's Temple, that cult, were Black people, and the fact that whatever he said and the experiences he said he had caused them to feel like to drink the poison or the purple Kool-Aid. What are you doing with what you feel like you've experienced or heard? And I think that's excellent how you describe that process. One more follow-up question. What could you say to a person that's on the opposite end, the person that's hearing this person saying they had these experiences? Moses came and sat on the couch and gave him strategy for the next 10 years of how humanity should move and things of that nature. How should a person who's listening to that, particularly a person of faith, this may be your pastor, the prophet of the house, what do we do with that information?
Mhm. Because I wanted to say the word that comes to mind is just think. And I say think because thinking is active. Like and I was going to say, put ourselves back in the position of like, kind of like toddlerhood of like 3, 4, 5, 6, where, and maybe this is just my child, but there's always a debate, like of a questioning, like, attitude towards things. And there's sometimes easy satisfaction, just the acceptance, but there's often a lot of pushback. Well, like, why are like leaves brown? Like, how do you really know? Or why is the snow melting? And then like always trying to find these like alternative explanations for a thing. And I would say as we grow up, we're taught and conditioned to be very passive, to just like receive things. And sometimes that conditioning is much more extreme, often in settings like institutions like churches, where being passive is something you're rewarded for. But it's not natural to not question. It's not natural to avoid thinking. It can be more comfortable or easy in a sense to not engage in the active process of thinking, but it's also more dangerous. So I would say everything received from anybody, whether it be family, friend, church, professional, there has to be some active thinking about, well, what do I do with this information? And just for folks who've never engaged in therapy, a lot of therapy is encouraging active thinking about things, reflecting on things, deciding what to do with things, because it can save us from hurt and sometimes from trauma, just to create that space for ourselves engaging and thinking about what to do with the thing that someone gave to us. And I would also say too, we're imperfect, and ourselves as like a tool for thinking is often not enough. So counsel can be helpful from whomever, but of course smart counsel. So a person who's just I was going to say drinking the Kool-Aid, but that might be insensitive. A non-thinking person is not helpful counsel. So having a person to run things by that is thinking, that has some healthy skepticism, can be another way of trying to figure out what to do with information. And the last thing I'll say is that not personalizing counsel as an attack on the person who gave you the information. So, for example, if I am critical as your counsel person of the pastor, you don't have to defend the pastor. It's just me offering a neutral criticism in
Mhm.
support of you. That doesn't mean that I'm like disparaging or bad mouthing the pastor. So, kind of separating my feedback or criticism from an attack can also help you receive that counsel in a way and make more use of it, rather than dismissing it as you just talking stuff about this man. He does not deserve that, or she does not deserve that from you at all, which ends up protecting people who are abusing their power, at the end
Yeah.
of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm so appreciative of you, Dr. Isom, for saying that because I don't know if you've experienced it, but I know that I've been in spaces with pastors or even like apostles who it seems like there's this tension between the mental health community and the faith community when it comes to conversations about what we do as therapists or as mental health professionals. And the tension comes from, and I was just in a space recently where it was an apostle in the space, and she was saying, well, there are mental health professionals and therapists that have problems too. and God is still at the center. And even when the mental health professional, I'm just repeating what she's saying, even when the mental health professional or the therapist, they may not have the answers to what you're looking for. So you're going to have to go to God anyway for what it is that you're seeking. And I said to her, I just want to make sure that we kind of take a step back from this and kind of look at this in from a bigger picture perspective, because mental health professionals or therapists are not gods. They're not. Therapy is a tool. It's a resource. Come into this profession to be the ultimate authority of information, because there is some truth to what you're saying. Yeah, we don't. I mean, we use science and evidence to help people to ground themselves and to give them some guidance on what they need to do. But we're not here to override what you believe in or your belief system. That's not what therapists are intended to do. So there was conversation around this, but I also kind of let her know like what it is that I do, because I don't think that there was a understanding about what mental health professionals do. And I think that kind of caused her to kind of shift and rebalance a little bit, because it seemed like there was this power struggle that may or may not exist between that and really having a conversation on what our roles are, like in terms of helping people. And I actually said, even as a therapist, I know that, I operate from a biopsychosocial spiritual framework, so I don't exclude because I'm a holistic provider. I can't speak for other providers. I actually include the spiritual orientation of every person that comes into my office, to include if a client does have a spiritual battle, or if they have distrust, or if they have some other issue related to their faith and their spirituality, I'm including that in the conversation. It's not excluded. So I don't think that there is on who's right or who's wrong. There's only, because oftentimes people come in and they do feel torn of like, and that's what the spiritual battle narrative is about, like their faith-based practices and then evidence-based mental health treatment. And there's this cognitive dissonance between what they believe in spiritually and their psychological needs. And so how do we create this space where there's balance between like attending to, having a healthy belief system, and also making sure that you're attending to things related to something physical or emotional that is happening to, such as you may be having severe anxiety or panic attacks or trauma that could be treated by a licensed professional, but you could still have your belief system and spirituality intact. It's both, and it's not either or.
Right.
So I think that's the conversation that we need to have more of just incorporating all of it versus this person is right and this person is wrong. I don't know what you all think about that, but
Yeah. I mean, I'll speak for myself and say, but also I feel like for the profession, there is plenty of like, all of us are burnt out, I think. Like we're overwhelmed by how much need there is for support. So who am I to say, oh, I want more of that responsibility? You can't have any. It just feels very like immature and childish, and it's not real. Like I do not feel like I own people's like mental health and well-being. I feel like I can offer a particular way of supporting like someone with things falling apart or having struggles. And the evidence supports that. Like if you look in the literature, it clearly like delineates or outlines what contributions specific things can make. You'll find support for medication, you'll find support for therapy, and you'll find support for spiritual and faith-based practices. They're all helpful when they're healthy. They're all helpful. So in reality, if I want to be less burnt out and overwhelmed professionally, then I'm going to create space at the table for any person who can contribute in some sort of way. Because I mean, we need each other. So the competitiveness or like territorial energy around this is just unhealthy and toxic and not needed. And I don't get it. And I appreciate you asserting like bringing the person in. Like, I mean, there really isn't a line here. We're just all kind of a part of the same process of offering people support. There should be space for all of us here when it's healthy, to be
yeah.
clear.
And what was interesting, it opened up a door of conversation because she wanted to talk more. Like there was more dialogue after getting over that hump
Right.
of
Right.
like, okay, we're not fighting, we're not fighting with anyone. And I'm assuming those who have a license and who are professionals, they know that and if they're really following their code of ethics, they know that all of these parts, the biological, the social, the psychological, the spiritual, are all part of a human being and supporting the bio individuality of the whole versus this or that or this. And so my hope is that we have more conversations with people who work with the clergy, because
Mhm.
there could be a lot of opportunity to really support people in ways that can create this balancing act between, faith and mental health. And I think for those who are listening, because I think we have a few more minutes just to ask a couple more questions about this balancing act in terms of what can people do to balance out these responsibilities of their faith and also taking care of themselves. What advice would you have for those who are either leaders or church members that are listening to this?
Yeah. What advice? I would say there's a tension between serving who you are as a person who exists and like these other things, including your faith. And your faith is a thing, just like serving like your community or other. It's a thing. It's kind of hovering above you, but you are still at the center of it all. And all of your choices should first be focused on the center, which is you. So if there's something you need and you need it, you just need it. And there shouldn't be a way that the things hovering over you, like the needs of society or even sometimes family or even faith, it shouldn't 100% all the time go in front of what your own personal needs are. And if you're operating from that standpoint of like centering yourself and your needs because that's deserved as a human, it can sometimes help you navigate that tension between maybe pausing somewhere or like making a choice somewhere that seems to violate what those other things hovering above you kind of want. Two, like there's stuff out there. I don't know if it's been like blackified, so I will make that disclaimer. But the APA that I used to be a part of, the American Psychiatric Association, for one example, has like through the foundation, which is the arm that does service work. There's a guide, like a faith-based leader guide, and I actually went into a church and used it. It was a Black church. It wasn't Black enough, like the guide. So it needs work, but it is very, very helpful. And it goes through not only a lot of what we've talked about in this conversation, not religious trauma, for example, like that's something that needs to be added, but it goes through like what is mental health, what's mental illness, the language part of it, the data that like 1 in 5 of us will experience some kind of quote unquote mental illness in our lifetime, that young people are dying, for example, by suicide, including Black people, and are needing support. And then it shifts to what can you do in the church? Literally like a list of different things that one could offer as a member of a church, but also as a leader in a church. And then it ends with caring for yourself as a person who's in leadership in a faith-based setting. So all of it's in there, and how that self-care taking can be really useful for avoiding, Nikki, to your points earlier, that manipulative, toxic, coercive control that often comes from a place of you're burnt out, you don't have much resources left, and those lesser parts of yourself are showing up and kind of dictating your behaviors. So those things exist and are out there. And I think viewing resources that combine like the faith-based lens and like the traditional mental health lens can just help like address the tension you were just talking about, Jonathan, because it really isn't real. Like it's not real. Like we're all kind of coexisting in the same space. So I want to share that guide. It's like 30 pages with y'all, because I think any person, leadership, church member, family, whatever, could make use of it. And then one other thing I'll call out is that it helps you draw the line between what is to be expected as a part of my human experience versus when are things falling apart. And it breaks it down by, is my thinking falling apart? Is my feeling falling apart? Are my behaviors or some behaviors of another person around me suggestive of things falling apart? And then you have a new lens through which to view the people around you and yourself that can help you figure out when you might need more support. And then I think also the final thing is that it can help people have conversations which should be had openly in the church together. Lots of conversations, lots of them, about the mental health part, the substance use part, and the where the church fits in part. And then of course the building relationships part of like when should we be reaching out or offering people things like the suicide hotline versus sending them to the church mom. So that one resource I think could be really useful. And I imagine there are others out there from other organizations as well. So
Awesome. Awesome. That's really good that there are things out there for people to take a look at just with that. So a few more questions around like trust, because I know we talked about that in this episode. of just people just are listening. They've listened to this episode. They've been hurt by trusted leaders in the church. They've been betrayed by them. They're mistrustful of these institutions in the Black community. And I'm wondering if there's ways that we can begin to restore trust. Is there something that can be done? New ways for people to engage in ways that feel safe. And this is for both of you, Nikki and Dr. Isom. Because I know that this trust is a big one for us as a people.
I'm gonna offer a word and ask Nikki because for me the trust starts with repair, and repair is a process, and repair involves a naming of a thing connected to the accountability for that thing, and then like everything that comes after. And I feel like with your story, Nikki, I imagine maybe there were opportunities where you sought repair and it was not possible, and probably examples where you hopefully sought repair and it was possible. And I feel like you could speak to that, and that ultimately can lead, if that repair process happens, to more trusting relationships where you were or where you seek support elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, that actually did happen, with a lot of different cult leaders. The fourth one in particular, I think that was the hardest situation I was in. And I recall for over a year trying to, hey, can we talk? Can we try to repair this? And, they didn't want to, but I ultimately came to accept the fact that I'm probably not going to get that from them. And I was able to eventually release that desire. But I think for me, and Jonathan, correct me if this is what you're referring to as far as the question, the trust for me with the mental health community was when I started to educate myself as far as the cycles, what I had actually walked through, the things that I kind of came to those groups with. That was not my fault. A lot of this was from my family of origin. And then what I could do to help myself, to support myself. And so when I realized the answers that I thought were going to be answered in the church wind up doing more injury and wounding, and I started to educate myself psychologically, specifically on these things, helped me. I was never fully distrusting of practitioners. I was never fully there because I had therapy before I got into the church world and everything. But there was still this, it's demonic. They use the S word. You don't need to see I'm not going to say it, but you know what I mean, that derogatory word
Oh,
on you don't need
yeah.
to see those type of people, and everything you need in life and godliness is in God, is in the Bible, is in the oil, is in the church. And so once that wounded me, all of that started to not feel real anymore. And I'm going to be honest, I was like, if Elmo can help me understand what I just walked through, me and Elmo going to sit down and have a conversation. So I was at that place in my life where not only for myself, but my daughter, I was a single mom at the time, and I needed help. And the church, the people that I loved and respected that were of the faith, they were encouraging me to go back. And I'm like, would you do that with somebody that's just been in a domestic violence partnership? No, but people don't look at it like that when it comes to the church. So educating myself helped those walls to kind of come down. Plus the desperation of, like you talked about earlier, I really need help right now. Let me go to a therapist and see if I can start there. And so that is one aspect of how that trust may start to build up just by desperation and life getting too hard. But I wish that we can move the needle a little bit further. Now, there are some churches, more progressive churches, and they acknowledge the LGBTQIA community. They acknowledge, hey, and you said this earlier, and I love it, but you said it from a practitioner standpoint. Like, look, I don't need everybody to come into my office, so to speak. There's so much. We need everybody that has a desire to help the human person, humanity, to heal and thrive. And I can't say that all spiritual leaders don't think that way, but I think it gets muddy when you're in a position of power where some leaders may look at the people as, "Oh, I'm going to use them to serve me," instead of you being a place of, I'm going to help support and build them up, and help them to individuate. I think a lot of leaders are still competitively looking at the members and then at the mental health community and like, you're not going to take my parishioners. No, sirree. So I'm not going to have a Saturday afternoon, community gathering where we have some practitioners come in and talk about mental health, because if they do, they may actually walk out. And I don't want that. It's not everybody, but some feel like it's competitive, like you talked about, Jonathan, again, it's platforms like this, is other people out there doing the work that we're going to take a toothpick and try to get this mountain to start to come down by having these conversations and people seeing and like I said, fears, not of a therapist, of a psychiatrist when I was in my early 20s, because I was told, you don't take no medicine, they're trying to kill, you know what I mean? And so to see a Black woman who is thriving in this field and cares deeply about your clients, cares deeply about the people you're serving, I think this is going to start helping to diminish the myths that are out there and the stigma that is out there. But that trust, it's going to take some time, but I would have never thought I'd been on the other end of it. I'm not a licensed mental health professional, but I am a practitioner, and I wouldn't have thought I was going to do this 10 years ago, but here we are, So, yeah.
Yeah.
Jonathan?
And I'll just say one thing, that this is not my lane, but just something to consider maybe for future conversations. If I have to earn trust, because that's a part of my job as a psychiatrist because of the history, why is it different for the church? It's just a question. Like why is trust earned like all these other places, but it's just like granted in a lot of ways in the church? And there's just something to that being one of the last frontiers where trust is just understood. The police ain't got it no more. The doctors don't have it anymore. But somehow in the church, and it's still a battle. So if y'all have that conversation, let me know. I'd love to listen.
Yeah, I think it's to question is, I think it's more about people going to the people that they trust, because to seek out support outside of your system of support, especially because if the church, to your point, Dr. Isom, if the church is really considered to be family, or a second family that is like outside of the family of origin, and the church is the second family system, to seek another support outside of that family may be a violation, or in terms of that perspective, a violation of the boundary that has been created. And so I think it's building, and this is going to be the next question, about building relationship or building rapport with the leadership of the church, whether it be the pastor or the leader that might be, I can't remember what the role is, or someone that is like has proximity to counseling or mental health and faith or Christianity. Not so much a Christian counselor, but someone that is really trying to advocate for mental health,
Mhm.
but have a spiritual component to their practice, may be a gateway to supporting those, and having a trauma-informed perspective on it. Because just there's a lot of different layers to pull back in order to access that sense of trust with the community after so much distrust, and pulling back those layers. But finding ways to build relationships with the people in the church that they already have access to. Because I think that there was an article that I read that the Black community is more likely to reach out to their primary care physician than they would a therapist, because of that relationship
Mhm.
traditionally.
Mhm.
So that, because they're not seeking outside of it. So, and I think just us kind of exploring, and we don't necessarily have to have an answer for this episode, but just us exploring like how mental health professionals, how they can support people in ways that really need our services. What can they do? How can they provide a container or a space that would be able to hold and withstand all of what that particular person may be experiencing, including the distrust, including the trauma, including all the betrayal, and all the things that person is carrying. What can be done to help mental health professionals understand how to connect to that client or that audience that might be having that issue? That's the next question, the follow-up question to it in the submission.
That's a good question. Yeah. And I'm recertifying for my boards. That's why this is top of mind for me. And there's like professional education credits that we have to earn. And I just thought to myself, wow, that would be a good like thing to offer, like as a resource, because there are so many people who the threshold is not like us, not me, not you. The threshold to getting in is a PCP or just like a person in a different kind of helping space. And they are being asked to do a lot to get people to walk through the door who need to. And that support would be really invaluable. And I also will recommend a person who themselves is a pastor and also a Black psychiatrist, who I think could add a lot to the conversation as well. And she's a friend who could really speak to those those bridging those connections between the different worlds.
Yeah, yeah. I think I think that's important to kind of, because I've also had to explore just in working with the Black community and securing Black clients, like marketing to Black clients. It's not the same way as people
Yeah.
in our field and how they market. It's not the same because you have to kind of go around and do around like workarounds and just in terms of even the language and just speaking, it can't be clinical. It cannot be that. And so there's so many, and this is, I think this is important for people to know on this episode, just the ways that we even as a providers reaching our own community, it's even challenging in the ways that we have to kind of meet people where they are and operate at this bottom up perspective versus top down. But yeah, I think that's kind of what we need to really explore in reaching the Black community and these challenges because of all these different things. So with that is our last question. That brings us to the end of today's episode. This was a very compelling and powerful conversation, surviving the Black church. And we just want to thank you, Dr. Isom, for joining us and sharing your insights and your wisdom and your grace on the level of complexity and real life challenges that we as a people experience. And so many of us probably, I'm sure Nikki and I, but also those who are listening are facing and balancing their belief system as well as their mental health. So I want to ask you if you want to share anything that you are working on, how people can find you, engage with you if you are working on anything right now. But this is your time to let us know, like, how can we support you and what's going on?
I will say I am working, and it just for people to know that I am working in the profession of psychiatry to help the field be less racist and more responsive to the needs of Black people. It's just important that you all know that. Two, this is more of a heads up. I'm working on a book through the APA that's focused on racial equity in psychiatry, and this conversation is going to make its way into that book. It's going to be a volume of chapters from different folks, and we just signed a contract for that, me and my group editorial team. And I just appreciate this conversation because it just has my gears turning around the very point that you made, Jonathan, about there's a whole lot of people out there who would benefit from some sensitivity to this conversation to help facilitate people's connection. So I just want to say shout out to you all for that. And I'll end there. You could find me on social media for the most part if you want to listen or hear anything. But I just am appreciative of just being in this space and being able to make that connection for that project that's going to be for 2025. So
It's awesome.
yeah.
Yes, that is. Can't wait for that book and looking forward to supporting you and all of that work you are doing systemically and just individually. And people that are listening, go look for her, find her, follow her, support this Black woman and all of what she is doing and elevate her and all of that. So, Nikki, did you have any closing thoughts or things that you want to share before we end this episode?
We've been waiting for this a long time. We've been wanting to let's sit down and talk with Dr. Jessica. Such wealth of knowledge around this topic. And, for people to see the crazy stereotypes that come with psychiatrists, I'm pretty sure you don't see that sitting right in front of you, right? This is a well, intelligent, understandable, sympathetic patient. When you talked about, you having different patients come in and how you walk them through, I heard empathy, I heard care and concern. And hopefully people, that listen to this episode may say, you know what, I think I may need that step in my life. I need to make some phone calls. What area are you in again? You near Jonathan?
Boston, specifically
Boston,
North.
that's right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so if you're in the Boston area, check her out, look her up. I can't wait to read the book as well. Like a lot of our guests are writing books for next year. So, whenever anything drops, let us know. We got your back. We're going to support and send it out to the network and everything. But this has been an awesome conversation. Yeah, just thank you for being a guest. We really appreciate you over here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank
Thank you both. This And this conversation is just the beginning. We still have some unanswered questions and some unresolved things, as we indicated on this episode. And we hope that this is something that can spark some reflection in all of you, our listeners. And like Dr. Isom said, it's okay to think, it's okay to ask questions, it's okay to seek support, and it's okay to find your own path to healing, whatever that looks like for you. And if today's episode resonated with you, we would love to hear from you, share your thoughts, reach out to us, connect to us on social media. We're on Instagram, Surviving the Black Church. And if you know someone that could benefit from this conversation, please share this episode with them. So I thank you both for being here and sharing. All of you, keep looking out for yourself, look out for your community. And until next time, stay empowered, stay true, and take care of yourself and your spirit, your mind. So until next time on Surviving the Black Church podcast, thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.